Thanks a lot, Dr. Peter Lintl. I think you have covered a very wide ground. I mean, right from the internal debate within Israel and the intricacies of the Israeli political system, and then international reaction, the issues related to the U.S. involvement and so on and so forth. I mean, just before coming to the question, I would request everyone to write their question in the chat box so that I can also see it, and Dr. Lintl can also see it, and we can then take it from there. I thought before actually opening it for the question answer session, I thought we can kickstart with some of the questions of my own. We have one of the things which you did cover the point that the reaction of the EU countries, but if you can throw some more light in terms of how how divided the EU is, and in terms of what exactly, since you are from Germany, you are in Germany. So what exactly is the German view of, and what kind of a position they might take if actually annexation takes place, or in terms of how the dynamics. We are still, as you very rightly pointed out, at a situation where it's not clear whether the annexation will actually happen or not. And then obviously the point which you also raised regarding whether it takes place, and in the election there is a change in the United States and a new president comes. President Biden is elected as president, who has been very clear about annexations, opposing the annexation, unilateral annexation I'm talking about, and whether Netanyahu will actually be able to kind of undo the annexation if it actually takes place. And then there is one of the things which I have been also following very keenly is the now very clear kind of rapprochement between Gulf countries and Israel. And we saw that, and you also mentioned the point, the letter, the open letter written by UAE foreign minister, I guess, or UAE. Yes, it was, I think, for UAE foreign minister, who wrote an open letter in the Israeli newspaper. So, how that dynamics can play out, if you can throw some more light, and then from there on, perhaps we can take on the question.
Thanks, Mudassir. Well, these are already quite some questions, right? But let me start. I'm happy to elaborate a bit more on the European position. It was already also asked in the chat. Europe has different positions regarding the Israel annexation. Where is no discussion is that those annexations are a violation of international law. Really, all 27 countries are clear on the issue that it's a violation. Just what reaction the EU should take is unclear. As already someone has written in the chat, there are a couple of states which reject sanctions categorically. One is Austria, and the other one being Hungary. So against the backdrop of this, it becomes it becomes more difficult for the EU to act, because many decisions in terms of foreign policy have to be taken unanimously within the EU. So basically every single member state has a veto right. So you can imagine how difficult EU foreign policy is at times, but okay. So therefore sanctions will probably not on the table. Also looking at Germany, the German Bundestag, the German parliament, has just last week passed a resolution that, yes, it sees the annexation as dangerous for the stability for the region, dangerous for also Israel's security. It's also a clear violation of international law, but at the same time, the resolution stated that Germany should not opt for sanctions, or it should not push for sanctions, should even keep other European member states from pushing from sanctions. And this is not because of the international law perspective, but of course because of the historical connection between Germany and Israel, dating back to the Holocaust and to the Third Reich. Yes, what does it mean? I was last week in a radio discussion where, among other people, one of the drafters of this resolution was there, German member of parliament. And I asked him, so you speak of consequences which Israel might face, but you say there will be no sanctions. And he said, well, and that's actually very funny, because that's what a colleague and I demanded in a policy paper the week or a couple of weeks before. Sanctions are not the way to go, but this does not, in my understanding, mean that we stop treating Israel preferably. So there are many legal treaties between Israel and the EU. For example, there's a neighborhood agreement, there's an EU-Israel association agreement and stuff like that, which gives both sides a lot of benefits, tax breaks, funds for research, many things. And it's not clear if that will not be passed, it will be continued or something like that. So I can imagine that this is a potential reaction coming from the European Union. Other things coming from the European Union might be more on a state level. For example, some states will probably recognize Palestine as a state, which will have consequences. For example, in the trial, Israel might see right now in the International Court of Justice, because so far there are still some people or some European states who are against the trial because they say Palestine is not a recognized state, so they cannot sue in the International Court of Justice. So that much from a European point of view. Your second question was related to the change in the US and if Netanyahu could undo the annexation. Well, that's exactly the point. I think the less Netanyahu is sure that Trump will win the elections, the less he is likely to annex. So, so again, as I said, he's caught between.
What would that mean? Sorry to interrupt, but what would that mean for Netanyahu's own future?
I mean, first of all, for Netanyahu's own future, of course, he is most interested that he, as more than anything else, that he will stay prime minister for a variety of reasons. Most of all, because he faces an indictment trial, and if the moment he stops being prime minister, when we have a verdict, which we will have in a year or two, maybe a lot more than two, he would face prison, basically. And all his effort, I don't know, but pundits claim at least that many of his efforts are concentrated fighting those trials. But okay, I don't know that for sure. So what would it mean for Netanyahu? I mean, it would definitely make his life harder, because it would support those voices within Israel that are more moderate, and not by coincidence, actually, those voices, moderate in terms of annexation, I mean, those voices are also less likely to support Netanyahu's stances in his search for immunity and in his attacks against the Supreme Court. So it would strengthen, I would say, more liberal voices. That's what I would say in terms of that. So, and undoing it, as I said, undoing an annexation will be very, very problematic. At the very moment, I do not believe that we will see a 30% annexation of the West Bank. You might see something more symbolic, settlement block or so. And one of the consequences, if Biden is elected, he will make, I was about to say, Israel pay for it. That will be the Israeli perspective, but he will demand something from Israel to get the negotiations with the Palestinians going again, if Israel annexes those territories. That's my estimation. Regarding a last question with the Gulf countries, yeah, I mean, also for the first time we see a letter in Hebrew in one of Israel's most known, most read newspapers, Yediot Ahronot, by the Foreign Minister of the Emirates, saying, please guys, we don't have formal relations, but you risk any, and he spoke of normalization. You risk, your annexation risks the normalization. Now, that was, of course, an important move, first of all, because it signaled, which is for many observers clear in any case, that we have a rapprochement, as you called it, Mudassir, between the Gulf states and Israel, mostly for the Iran issue, but also for other issues. But he warned that it endangers that. Now, in Israel, this is seen, people see that differently. Those who are more cautious also about the annexation will take this warning seriously. Others will say, now look, especially the right will say, now look, all the time the world has told us in order to get normalization with the Arab states, we need a two-state solution. Now we threaten annexation and they offer us normalization. So the right reads the whole situation very differently than the center and the center left. I think these were your questions, Mudassir, right?
Yes. So we have a host of new questions.
I see.
See some of it. A lot of it is about also the Palestinian, the reaction of the Palestinians. And there was one question regarding the young Palestinians saying that if you look at the social media discussions or debates within Palestinian, among the Palestinians, it's like, okay, if annexation comes, there is not much of a difference because we are already living in a de facto kind of annexed situation. There was also questions regarding the annexation, the regulation law for settlements, whether Netanyahu will bring back that law. And then there were also questions regarding the UN, sanctions by the United Nations. Then there was also a question regarding the implication for the Israeli-Jordanian relations. I mean, because Jordan also has warned that it will kind of, not in so many words, but revisit the peace agreements it has signed with Israel. So, I mean, how that pans out. Also in terms of security and the possibility of intifada kind of uprising within the Palestinian, among the Palestinians who are in occupation. So what do you see in that sense? I mean, these are some of the questions. Perhaps you can answer them, and then we can, if time permits, we can have another round of questions.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, I'm thankful for the questions on Jordan and the Palestinians, because I had that in the lecture, but I cut it out for time reasons. So I do not think that the Jordanians will really cancel the peace treaty. That's, I think, a step they cannot afford. But it will nevertheless seriously threaten the Jordanian-Israeli relations. Especially, in all likelihood, annexation will end Jordanian and Israeli security cooperation. Now, one might say this hurts Jordan more than it hurts Israel, as we could see at the heydays of the Syria war, when Israel really helped Jordan, that the Islamic State, ISIS, stops before the Jordanian border. But of course, a stable Jordan is more than anything in the interest of Israel. Jordan, and even though Israel has a border to Syria, Jordan is a buffer zone for Israel regarding Syria, and of course also regarding Iraq, and therefore also via proxies regarding Iran. So Jordan is territorially extremely important for Israel, and therefore Israel has an interest in continuing the security cooperation with Jordan and in its internal stability. In addition, as you know, some 70%, I don't know the exact numbers, of Jordanian citizens are of Palestinian origin. They consider themselves Palestinians, so annexation will also contribute to a major uproar domestically within Jordan. That's also a factor. Coming to the Palestinians, what might happen there? You know, first of all, let me say something. The Palestinians could have played a more helpful role in preventing annexation, because they were really not forthcoming in terms of, look, guys, here we are. This is a two-state solution. That's what we aim for. And that's what we publicly say and reach out to whoever wants to hear it. What they did, I'm not sure if you heard of it, they wrote a so-called non-paper to the quartet, that is Russia, the UN, the EU, and the US, and saying, yes, we want a two-state solution. But it was not a public diplomatic effort. So in that sense, Israel can always say, well, we have no partner on the other side. So that was, my opinion, really a mistake, a diplomatic, public mistake by the Palestinian leadership. But what does it mean for the Palestinians? All the time we hear, of course, of the third intifada. Will a third intifada come? I don't know. We have heard warnings of a third intifada for so long now, you know, hardly anyone, if you hear something too often all the time, people stop believing in it. But what is certainly the case, if we see annexations like the ones I indicated, annexations as we see in the Trump plan, then, or even lesser annexations, one of the consequences will be, and we see that already now, that the Palestinians, or the PA, the Palestinian Authority, will stop also, like Jordan, its security cooperation with Israel, which will mean that the Israeli army will need to police the Palestinians. And that's, of course, a recipe for a catastrophe, because then you have all the time potential clashes between Palestinians and the Israeli army. So only that, intifada, if an uprising comes or not, but determining the security cooperation will have already the consequence that we will see more clashes between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and you don't know what will happen then. Okay, one question was, will the UN, I guess the question was related to the Security Council, because the UN itself cannot push sanctions. The UN Security Council will not declare any sanctions, because it will because you have still the United States there, which will lead to any sanctions. Nevertheless, and you have Germany now heading the UN Security Council and the EU, I think you will see some coordinated efforts to make this a public issue. So you will see something, but it will be on the level of diplomacy, knowing that at least in the UN Security Council, it won't be possible to pass any sanctions or something. One question related also to the regulation law, the so-called Chok HaSdara. Let me just read the question. Netanyahu said he will bring back that law. Well, for now he has different problems, I have to say. And I don't see two things. I don't see that his coalition, the minor part of this coalition headed by Gantz, will support a comeback of the so-called regulation or regularization law. Secondly, I don't see any kind of legal phrasing of a law which would not been stricken down by the Supreme Court again. So he will continue to say that, of course, but I don't see the possibility to pass it. Okay, that's the questions I remember right now. Did I overlook something? Come on, Mudassir, you want to help me? What did I overlook? For the Palestinian point of view, there's one question: if if annexation is, if the two-state solution is still relevant for the Palestinian point of view, no, it's not. I don't see how it could be if we see that 30% annexation or general. I mean, with 30%, it's de facto off the table. With a lesser part of an annexation, it becomes more of a disputed issue. But really, if we see 30% of the West Bank annexed, I don't see how the Palestinians could go for a two-state solution.
So I think you have covered most of the issues raised in the question, and I think it is now. I mean, you have made some of the points very clear in the sense that it's still a unfolding issue, and we have to wait and watch and as to how things unfold. There are a variety of factors which will actually be very important in terms of how things pan out. Thanks a lot for your for your talk and for your question, for taking all the questions. I would now request